my name is Jamie Wilkes, and I'm playing Parolles in Allswell, who is sort of the comic subplot character who he's quite similar to Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream, Malvolio in Twelfth Night, in that there's a kind of alongside the main plot, there's this whole strand where this normally an arrogant kind of character gets his comeuppance. So that's Parolles and Allswell, and the Duke of Buckingham is Richard III's right-hand man, who kind of gets him onto the throne, and it doesn't go well. So he's kind of a bit of an Alistair Campbell, bit of a Dominic Cummings, kind of Steve Bannon sort of figure. Those people we see in like real history, kind of throughout history, who they're instrumental to getting people into power, and then their uses kind of get used up.
Yes. And what was it kind of then that attracted you to the roles?
I mean, they're two fantastic parts. They're amazing. Like, I'm very fortunate to have them as a double. Parolles is a lot of fun with like a really clear arc and a story, and quite an important journey, I think, an important story to tell about kind of I've got a line: "He who knows himself a braggart, let him fear this, for it shall come to pass that every braggart should be found an ass." And then Buckingham has a similar journey. So it's quite nice when you find those sort of supporting characters in Shakespeare who do get their own arc. And that's really attractive, because you're like, okay, there's a story I can tell here. It's not just a functional sort of thing. There's their own plot to them.
Yeah. And obviously I'm going to focus a little bit more on break it down to do Allswell first.
Okay.
Obviously, kind of, as you say, you kind of get that comedic kind of role that you get to play with the character, but also then you kind of get to balance it kind of towards the latter part of the play, where you're kind of more of a touching kind of, he's kind of unraveled, isn't he? And kind of how do you kind of go about preparing yourself for that kind of journey throughout the show?
It's with Parolles especially, you've kind of got this tragic figure at the center, and then there's all these layers that he's put on top. And there's a real fun game to be played with the audience of their expectations of what kind of character it is. So you get them really settled, like, oh, this is someone we can laugh at. This is the clown. This is the comic character. And something that Shakespeare's definitely written in is the turning point where the audience is sort of complicit in what's effectively bullying. So I try as much as possible to just play it as true and as human. And the audience are like, oh yes, this is great. We can laugh at this guy. This is the comic relief. And then that truth then unravels, like you say. Once the layers get stripped back, you see that actually it's a tragic clown, and most clowns really are kind of based in tragedy. And I love kind of a lot of kind of modern clowns, as well as sort of kind of commedia, Shakespeare's clowns. There's a real tragedy and sadness to them, which is always so attractive as an actor, because you don't have to try and be funny. You just have to try and play the cringe of it.
Obviously, kind of, as we touched on, the kind of physical comedy side of the role, whereas it was that scene where you're kind of climbing off the balcony at one stage, and that how much kind of creative freedom do you get to create that kind of comedy side?
Well, Blanche. So I've worked with Blanche. This is my third time. So I did Comedy of Errors with her at the Globe, and then I did Two Noble Kinsmen at the RSC, and she just gives us free license. So we chatted about what the production was, what kind of things and themes she wanted to draw out of it. And then I was pretty nervous at first that it was set modern, because if it was set period, kind of it's quite easy to see what Parolles needs to be, a sort of Captain Flashheart, sort of braggart in tights, waving a sword around. You think, okay, that's fine, I can have some fun with that. But modern, I was like, oh, I don't know who this guy is. Or whether I am that guy, because that's when the conversation is about, oh, he'd be a big gym bod guy.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to manage that in a few months, which is where the muscle suit kind of thing came from. So I mean, Blanche kind of like, she gave lots of affirmation and kind of like encouragement, and whenever I'd have like a half a crazy idea, she'd push me to try it. So generally it's I had free reign to do anything. So if I said I wanted to climb down a rope, they let me.
Yeah, and it works really well. Obviously, I like when you obviously interact with the audience is also just brilliant, because obviously that can throw anything at you, I suppose, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's always fun because we always get something different, and I think it's very much right within the spirit of the piece. And we've had interesting conversations about, especially post-COVID, people coming to places like the Royal Shakespeare Theatre and not necessarily knowing whether they're welcome there. Whereas if an actor on stage talks to you, you talk back, and then he responds, then it's kind of it's a clear sign that you are allowed to be here. Whatever you do, whatever you contribute is right for the show, and you're welcome in these spaces. So I do love the audience interaction for that. It's always surprising, really.
Of course. And obviously, what gets you into the kind of the character? Is it kind of, as you mentioned, that kind of muscle suit? Is it the wig? Is it what kind of gets you from you into Parolles?
I mean, it's definitely the kind of the costume, the mask. I like it. It's always good when you get to put on a really distinctive look, and you just look at your reflection and you see someone else staring back, and you think, oh, okay, I'm this person now. And there's so many layers that he's got on, which so I look in the mirror, I don't recognize myself at all. My body's a different shape, my hair's a different shape, my face looks different. So it's quite easy. As soon as you see that, you think, okay, this is who I am. Then I put on some kind of music that I think Parolles would probably listen to. And I'm lucky in that I can listen to the first kind of part of the play, essentially behind some curtains. So I'm on stage and I just listen to the other actors and be like, okay, this is the measure of it today, and hear the audience. And there's a few laughs in that very first bit where I can listen to, and I think, okay, this is the audience. And then I get to jump out on stage and kind of meet them myself. So it's quite nice to kind of get into that mode and focus in rather than walk in from the dark.
Yeah.
Who's going to be there?
Yes. And it's kind of, we've already kind of touched on it, but what would you like an audience member to take away thinking about Parolles at the end of the play?
So I think it's a story of kind of, he's so constrained by his ideas of what he as a man should be. And Shakespeare's written this beautiful speech, there's place and means for every man alive. And that's his lesson by the end, is actually he doesn't need to fit into this box. Whoever he is acceptable and is right. And the more honesty he has within himself, the happier he'll be. So I hope the audience kind of learn that, but also realize their own role in how we put these restrictions on other people. So like we said before about how they're laughing at him at first, and then there's some really kind of disturbing scenes where he's kind of bullied and well, bullying's putting it lightly. He's kind of interrogated, he's humiliated, he's actually stripped bare, and Blanche's production adds to how that works in the modern world, where kind of online shaming, he's publicly shamed, so he has no choice but to live in that shame, but within that he finds a freedom. So I hope they hope they take away like a lesson in like, oh wow, what are we doing to people? What restraints are we putting on each other, but also on ourselves? Would be the main lesson, I hope.
Yeah.
Laugh and find it funny.
Yeah, and obviously, as you just touched on again, kind of the modern kind of setting that the piece in, I thought it worked really well. Obviously, the kind of the social media side when it's projected back, and that kind of it talks, like you say, to a modern audience. But why do you think kind of that works so well for the production?
Well, why do I think it works well?
Yeah.
I think there's something, because whenever you do a Shakespeare, you've got to sort of do lots of cultural translation, which even if you set it period, doesn't translate to modern day. And one of the big things is this social credit thing, where all you have is your reputation and your honor and that sort of thing. And that's a theme that comes up in so many Shakespeare plays. Like, people do really wild stuff to protect their honor. And social media and like the online world provides a really useful version of that kind of honor system, that credit system, that your online persona you can build into being whatever you want it to be. You can get loads of power, you can get loads of influence through the online world, but it's quite a fragile thing. All it takes is a bit of social humiliation, and then that's on the internet forever. So I think it's a really useful way of telling that sort of Jacobean story of social status in a way that people would recognize and know that they themselves have participated in or are kind of at the mercy of.
Yeah, and obviously then on the flip side, going from kind of playing the character like Broles, you're playing obviously a character then in Richard III who's based in history as well. Kind of, so do you kind of then, when you get that kind of part, do you then do some research into that history, or?
It's tricky with the histories because there's stuff that Shakespeare's interested in and there's stuff that he isn't.
Yeah.
And we know 400 odd years later a lot more than Shakespeare did. Yeah. We also don't know as much about the kind of what's just passed on by grandparents. And Greg Doran, our director, he was very clear in there was as much distance between Shakespeare and Richard III as we have from the First World War. So if we think like what do we learn about the First World War just from grandparents or their grandparents, how much of that is passed down that maybe isn't in the history books? So there'll be different ideas of what Richard III meant to that audience. So there's a certain amount of going back to the sources that Shakespeare would have used. There's a lot of kind of pamphlets and what kind of sometimes people dismiss now as Tudor propaganda, which isn't necessarily our job to make a judgment on whether Richard III was a goodie or a baddie. It's about what the play is doing. We're telling that story. Otherwise, we'll try and kind of mangle it and it'll contradict the play. But the Duke of Buckingham is... there's lots of things that Shakespeare's added in or given to Buckingham, which other people did, which is useful to know about because you realize, well, okay, that's the impact of that speech. So the speech kind of outside what in real life was by some priests outside St. Paul's Cathedral, he gave to Buckingham. Think, okay, that's the impact. That's how useful that was. That kind of invoked this kind of rumor of the prince's bastardy, that sort of thing. So whilst the history's there and it's interesting and useful, there's as much that can get in the way of play. And actually Shakespeare's given us enough of just the human story, and Shakespeare's kind of always more interested in the human stuff and the psychology than facts. His facts are all over the place. You can tell that he's remembering and misremembering. Yeah. Some of the geography is kind of all over the place. So it's not always useful to kind of get too bogged down with the details.
Yes. And then obviously in the play, kind of Buckingham, as you kind of mentioned at the start, kind of obviously rebels against Richard and it doesn't go so well. Kind of why do you think he kind of chose to do that?
So I think it's because he's done all this work for Richard, and then Richard's been pretty ungrateful. So there's an ego thing. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to be the right-hand man and the second in command sort of thing, but if that's not seen, or if that power starts to slip away, you think, well, actually, I'm going to teach you a lesson. So I think there's an ego thing. I think it's also hurt in that there is a personal relationship between Richard and Buckingham. There's a friendship there. Margaret's curse to him is that he's going to split thy heart with sorrow. So Shakespeare's decided there's an emotional thing there. So I think as much as kind of if there was a speech about Buckingham justifying why he went and rebelled, I think actually the one that Shakespeare is interested in is the emotional betrayal. It's the pain thing of actually, this is my response to you treating me like this. But he does also give up. So he kind of, he starts to rebel, but then ends up kind of just wandering these swamps alone. And that's when he gets picked up. And that's a man who's not kind of desperate to seek revenge. That's someone who's broken. So I think that's kind of what's going on there. And that's when he gets picked up and kind of sort of willingly gets led off to be executed.
Yeah. And obviously then, because playing these two different roles, how do you kind of go about balancing them kind of obviously I know we've only just got to the stage where you're doing both again, but how are you kind of balancing that?
So we brought Richard back last Friday after about 2.5 weeks. And it's coming back on this Friday. So we're kind of getting into the rhythm now of doing them both. It's very interesting. And Greg actually said to me on Friday, just remember you're not playing Parolas. Don't chat to the audience. Yeah. Just remember what your job is in this one. But they're a lovely kind of pairing because they're very similar in many ways because it's all about their social placing, how the public work, how they can manipulate public opinion to kind of get some status or some power. It's really interesting that, and they're two very different men. But maybe it's just because I'm playing them both that I also see them as they're not too dissimilar.
Yeah,
like sort of going in similar directions in different worlds. But yeah, it's that public opinion that they're both kind of obsessed with. And I'd say maybe Buckingham's a bit smarter than
yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously these two productions kind of mark the end of the cycle because obviously the RSC have done about a 10-year cycle up there that filmed all the productions. Kind of how has it been to then kind of knowing that you're kind of part of that world, that these two productions are going to be filmed and put out in the world?
It's really interesting because my first RSC season was 2013, and we were rehearsing Wendy and Peter Pan whilst Richard II was up. So kind of I've been at the RSC as long as this kind of project's been going on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of there's an emotional resonance there for me personally in terms of my career. And also I'd seen the production of All's Well that was sort of in the summer just before that, Richard II. So there's a kind of a cyclical thing there. It's wonderful to be part of a massive kind of RSC blockbuster, sort of Richard III, which whenever that's programmed is going to be one of the big ones because it is one of the big Shakespeares. And then there's All's Well, which is kind of at the opposite end where it's rarely done. Lots of people don't know it. It's quite interesting having friends come up who love Shakespeare and they're like, I've never seen this play. I've never even read it. Yeah. And like watching a Shakespeare play for the kind of the first time, which is exciting. But it's wonderful to be part of this project and working with Greg and working with Blanche again. And I think it's an amazing achievement to and exactly what the RSC should be doing. Because I remember Greg saying that there was like 4 Romeo and Juliets in the space of 3 years or something.
Yeah.
And I like that Romeo and Juliet, but there's other plays and things that you can discover and give people the opportunity to kind of see other plays. And I've met lots of people who are completionists and they want to see all the Shakespeares. And there needs to be productions of All's Well on in order to do that. And so they're very excited that they can get to see this. So to present a project which covers all the plays, I think is wonderful and wonderful to be part of.
Yes, it's amazing. Kind of, as you say, kind of that world, even obviously in the lockdown, because you were part of the Henry, weren't you? The Henry the First.
The part one, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of it's kind of in that world was just amazing. And how was that for you? Kind of obviously doing a production that's not obviously going to get to the stage, was it? Kind of thing.
It's that was really interesting because we did I think about 4 weeks on it in the Ashcroft room, which is the rehearsal room above the Swan. And we always knew it wasn't going to get in front of an audience. it was kind of when was it? It was 2021, I think. Yeah, so it was last year.
Actually, yeah.
So there was still lots of kind of COVID rules which seem weird to look back on, where we had to be 2 meters apart, masks on if you weren't acting. No one was allowed to touch. You had to have sanitizer if you passed a prop, all that sort of thing. And they basically just did a few camera rehearsals, and then when it came to the actual performance, which was just a rehearsal room stream, they kind of shut the doors and they said, "Good luck." We waited in silence for them to kind of do a countdown, and then we just did it. Yeah. And it was a really unique experience, because it wasn't like a rehearsal room run, because you're not being watched by people around the world normally in a rehearsal room. But it also wasn't a performance. It was this unique thing that could only ever exist in that moment. So it felt very special for that. And all we had really in that room were the stage management, the band, the camera operators, and the actors. So it was really charged between us, knowing that the audience were kind of outside watching elsewhere.
Yeah. As I said, it was tremendous. I thought kind of interesting, that kind of, as a kind of theatre lover myself, that kind of insight into that world, that the bit you don't see, I suppose, kind of that the other side, because obviously you just see it, the finished performance, don't you? So that was really interesting. But now I'm going to throw the deep question I ask everyone. What does theatre mean to you?
Theatre is, I think the most important thing is the community aspect, in terms of the people in that room come together and they form a temporary community, and there's a shared imagination, a shared consciousness, which is why I always love things that kind of break the fourth wall. I'd much rather have the lights up and be able to see the audience and actually look them in the eye, because it becomes a conversation. And like we said before about people feeling welcome in spaces, if you actually do that, if you look them in the eye, you chat to them and they can respond and feel like they can respond, then there's a liveness that you don't get from TV, cinema, or kind of streaming. It's this shared moment that only exists for this brief period, and I think that's all the more powerful and memorable, because you are part of something. And especially in Allswell, but in any play, Rich is the same, because we do chat to the audience in that. They make it unique for us, because people will look at you in a different way, even if they don't respond. Just they'll be excited or surprised, or raise their eyebrows, or they'll be asleep. It's always unique what the audience are doing. I think audiences sometimes aren't aware how much they influence us as actors. Every cough, every phone going off, it's something that we're aware of. It's kind of amazing what people will do, even like a few feet away.
Yeah.
Imagining they're invisible somehow. Yeah. So we can see you, you're there.
Yeah.
And it's nice to acknowledge that. And so I think it's that temporary community thing, which I think is so important, that it's an art form that relies on a group of people. You can't do it by yourself. It has to have some sort of connection. So that's why I think theatre is kind of a beautiful art form.
Brilliant. And my final question for you today is simply, for anyone out there who has not been, why should they come and see Allswell or Richard III, or both?
They should come because it's an incredible cast. Some really top-notch actors across the board, without a weak link, having fun, being brave and going into sort of dark places. There are two productions that aren't afraid to have the light and the shade. Another director referred to it as church and tavern. I think both productions really enjoy bouncing between them and kind of tricking the audience, and also letting the audience decide whether or not they're still in the church, whether they're still in the tavern, being surprised by that. Two very different productions, so see both of them, because you'll see the same actors doing completely different things, and you won't recognize them, or you won't believe that that's the same person. both the productions look stunning. They're fun stories. They'll be surprising. Even if you've seen Richard III, you'll be surprised. If you've never seen All's Well, you'll be surprised. So I think it's an exciting moment. And again, to round off the kind of this folio project from Richard II through the canon. And this may be the last time you see All's Well for a decade.
Yeah, hopefully not, because it's tremendous. So that just wants me to say thank you for your time. Both plays are on till October the 8th.
Yeah.
So people, and obviously they're going to the cinemas as well. So even more chance for people around the world to see it, which is exciting.